Welcome. Welcome to the 44 Club. This is the first time I've spoken at a 44 Club. How many of you have actually been to a 44 Club before? Hands up. Okay, welcome back. This is, for people that don't know me, I'm the head of innovation at Cheil, and actually kind of as a hobby, as a sideline, I'm also one of the founders of Creative Social. How many in this room have heard of Creative Social? A few of you. Hopefully you've been to some of our events. So just to give you a very brief background, it's the first time we've done a collaboration with the 44 Club, so I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Creative Social is a collective of about 250 creative directors from around the world. We do events, we've been doing for 8 years, in different cities around the world, 40 people, but in the last 18 months, we've done quite a few events here in London. So, our key what we're trying to do, initially it just started as a small amount of people. Dave Bedward's one of the first people. It's been involved since the start, for example. But we actually set ourselves a task of being a platform for progression for creatives and the industry in general. For tonight, we've got a hashtag, which is hashtag BPOA. If you've got your own best piece of advice that you've ever been given, please do tweet and use that hashtag. Also, if any of you are shy, I hear you don't have this problem, but if any of you are shy in other events, but feel free to ask questions. We are going to have people monitoring those questions. And after the 6 of us speak, I'm actually going to be chairing a panel for about 15 minutes. So we want to make that as interactive as possible. So why are we here? I am joined by some fantastic speakers. I have 2 of my fellow socials. So I've got Dave Bedward, who is creative partner at Lean Mean Fighting Machine. Did that on purpose. I'm delighted to have him here because we've actually done this event before, and he was meant to turn up, but his kids had the shits, and you'll understand why that is actually relevant to tonight. You've got Mark Earls, the Herdmeister. Have any of you read the book The Herd? A few of you. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's one of my favourite books I've read in the last 10 years. So I'm delighted to have Mark here. We've got Chris Willingham, who's partner at Fallon, will be coming on. We've got Mel Cruikshank, who is CEO of Wonderman, coming on. And we've got Darren Rubins, who's CEO of PhD, coming on. So they'll come on and introduce themselves a bit more fully. But first of all, coming back to the topic, advice. What does advice mean? As with all things, I took this from Wikipedia, advice equals an opinion or recommendation offers as a guide to action or conduct. The reality is I'm kind of hoping I don't need to tell you that definition. How many of you have in your lives asked for advice? Put your hands up. I'm trying to work out if anyone hasn't put their hand up, so I'll be very surprised. We've all asked for advice, and personally, I have to say I've been very lucky in my career to have some great people around me I could ask for advice. So, for example, I used to be CEO of Profero, and this is Lord Putnam, the producer of Chariots of Fire, and I was lucky to have him for 2 years to actually go as a mentor and get advice. This is Patrick Hollister. Hopefully some of you have seen him as part of the IPA. I've worked with him now for the last 5 years, and I consider him a mentor. And obviously, I'm sure you guessed, this is my mum and dad. We all get advice from our parents at some stage in life. But what I hadn't really realised, I think, until we did an event about 3 years ago, is the power of the advice itself, just the words. And actually, you can equally get that advice from complete strangers. This is a guy, I'm going to see if I have actually got a few books to give away. If anyone knows who this guy is, you can win a book.
Is that the guy from Shit My Dad Says?
No, but good guess. Anyone else have a guess who that is? Okay, this guy's name is Jim Haynes. Jim Haynes was one of our speakers in Paris about 3 years ago, and probably one of my favourite speakers. He invented, without really knowing it, he invented supper clubs. So for 30 years, without fail, every Sunday night, he has hosted a dinner for 70 people at his flat. You can apply for it. It doesn't cost any money. You go there and he asks for contributions. It started with him just doing it with his local friends, and it just grew and it grew and it grew. And you can imagine 30 years ago, some of you probably don't believe this, but there wasn't a thing called the internet or mobile phones. So people, it just grew from word of mouth. People would phone him, say, come from all around the world. And this guy, I think, I'm not sure what Dave and Mark were both there. He understood people like I've never heard anyone understand people, because he has strangers in his house every weekend watching how they interact with strangers. And then at the end of the talk, a guy called David Pugh Jones, works for Microsoft, he asked an absolutely fantastic question. He said, at the end of the talk, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given? And I'll never forget it, because it was this guy's a very sage man, and we were all listening because of what he had to say before. And he said quite simply, if you do something for someone, forget it immediately. If someone does something nice for you, never forget it. And I'm sure you all appreciate that's a great piece of advice. We don't always, I have to say, I have to keep on going back to it and keep on remembering it. But we kind of went, that's interesting, that's a fantastic question. So we then asked all the other speakers. And then I thought, well, there's such inspirational answers. Why don't we ask all of the people attending? So Creative Socials are about 35 people. So we asked all the attendees what the best piece of advice they've ever been given was. And I wrote a blog post off the back of it. So you can go and have a look on the Creative Social blog. You'll see those pieces of advice. As you can see, it didn't go particularly viral. It got 15 retweets, not that many. But what it actually did is it facilitated a conversation. So 2 weeks later, I was in New York with the founder, one of the people that runs an agency called Bernstein Andrewley. They represent talent. Has anyone heard of them or worked with them? Here, their equivalent is CIA, Central Illustration Agency, I think they're called. And she represents talent. And I just told her about this story, about this great question, best piece of advice ever. And she said, every year we create a book. Do you mind if we take that advice that your socials have been given and actually match some of our artists and actually create some of that advice and bring it to life? So I said, of course I wouldn't mind. So 6 months ago, we launched this book, which is here. I actually only have, this is no word of a lie, we did a printed run. It's a limited print run. These are the last 3 copies I've got. And I've got them to give away. So make sure you tweet, use BPRA, and I'll choose at the end who I'm going to give them away to. As I said, we created this book. And what was interesting for me is the advice that I gave is actually, so we're here because of the book, but also the advice I actually gave that I was given is also the reason why we're here. So the piece of advice I put up was it's better to be wrong and interesting than right and boring. So bear with me, I don't know this off the top of my head. So this is where this came from. It was a blog post by Dave Trott. I'm sure you know Dave Trott, and some of you read his daily words of wisdom. And it was entitled Being Right versus Being Interested, dated 20th of August 2008. I always tell students that we usually have to make a choice. On the one hand, being right but dull. On the other hand, being wrong but interesting. So which should they choose? I say go for interesting every time. Why doesn't most advertising work? Because it's right. It's been debated, discussed, argued, briefed, researched, debriefed, rebriefed until it's right. And the problem, it's right. It's not interesting. It's not interesting so no one notices it. No one notices it so no one remembers it. No one remembers it so it doesn't work, no matter how right it is. There is just too much advertising out there for it all to work. Statistics say we're each exposed to roughly 1,000 different advertising messages a day. How many do you remember from yesterday? Radio, posters, tube cards, online pop-ups, don't exist anymore. SMS, ambient, TV, magazine ads, newspaper ads, viral ads. You can probably remember one that was really good and ones that were really bad. The extremes, because extremes are interesting. They're interesting that they haven't had all the life sucked out of them by being right. Visibility isn't about being right, it's about being interesting. As Picasso said, what use are computers? All they can give you is answers. A woman doesn't really want Mr. Right. She wants Mr. Interesting. In the pub, who do you want to listen to? The bloke who's always right or the bloke who's always interesting? Being right is overrated because being right is seen as the truth. But what is the truth? The truth is whatever you believe it is. And you only believe what you want to believe. And you only want to believe what's interesting. As Churchill said, never let the truth spoil a good story. So obviously Dave Trott there was talking about creativity. To be honest with you, again, that's what I love about advice, is I took it for something completely different. At the time, we just launched the Creative Social blog. I was the sole blogger at that time. I mean, how many of you in this room actually blog? How many of you microblog? Quite a few more. I mean, certainly in 2008, the biggest hurdle I had is every time I had to put it live, I was like, oh, this is going to the whole world. Do I really want to put it right? Maybe I'm wrong. And then I read this and I thought, do you know what? It doesn't matter if I'm wrong. And actually in my career, to be honest with you, the most I've actually learned is when I was wrong, because it created debate. And I'll come on to this whole idea, you know, as long as you're listening and actually feeding back, it's actually some of the most interesting conversations you can actually have. Just out of interest, this is the illustration that actually happened. It was done by Olaf Hajek. I've never met him. Apparently he's a German illustrator. I only looked him up this morning. Dave Bedward didn't even know what his illustrator's name was, so at least I've moved forward. But I think it's important, again, about the inspiration you can get from other people's advice. So I'm going to kind of cheat. I'm going to talk about the other people's advice as well that are actually in the book. And I think coming back to the same point I talked about being wrong and interesting, what's important about that, and this is from Graham Fink, who's the Executive Creative Director, well, Chief Creative Officer, actually, of M&C Saatchi, no? Ogilvy, China. And he just said his advice that he received was very simply, be yourself. Okay, and I think, you know, you do need to be yourself, you know, to take that kind of viewpoint. By being yourself, you are true to yourself. Again, it's fantastic to see you all here. I think there should be more of these events, and I think you've done well to come along to them. I think, again, just looking at the book, the piece of advice that I think is some of the best advice you can actually take is this one here. This was actually by Gavin Gordon-Rogers at LBI Edinburgh, who simply said, go out there and meet people. So I hope you get as much from networking as you do from actually listening to us as speakers. So one piece of advice to give to you all, make sure if you don't do it, introduce yourself to a stranger at the end of this place. If you don't tend to go and speak to the speakers, go and introduce to the speakers. You never know what interesting might come out the back of it. And again, I did talk about listening. I thought this was a great piece of advice from Jan Kretz, who's at JWT, when he said, take your time to listen more and slow down. Now, that old adage, you have two ears and one mouth, is never truer. And that whole slow down has never been true now in the technological age. I actually did an experiment. I'd just come back from my honeymoon, which is why I keep on playing my ring, if anyone noticed. And, you know, I just switched off for 17 days. And it was amazing how nice it was to actually switch off from being connected. So that idea of slowing down, I think, is really important. You'll either believe this or you won't. I thought this was a great piece of advice. Leave your comfort zone. I've done with you'll believe this, you'll probably go, yeah, that makes sense. 3 years ago, I hated public speaking. I hated it. It was the most hateful thing in the world. I even hated speaking in front of the agency, a small team. Okay, but do you know what? I left my comfort zone. Yeah, and actually some of the most important development you're going to do in your career is actually by leaving your comfort zone. So I actually make efforts, probably on a quarterly basis or 6 monthly basis. When someone asks me to do something and I go, oh, I'm not sure I want to do that, the immediate answer now for me is I'm going to do it. And I actually find opportunities to leave that comfort zone. I've just got two more to talk about. This actually is probably, would have been my number one, if I'm honest, but someone had already taken it. So I had to use my other one, this is from Gemma Butler from LBI Edinburgh, when she said, love what you do and life will love you. I think we're really lucky in the advertising industry to do something fantastic. If you don't love it, really my advice to you is get out. There's a great documentary, short documentary called Lemonade. Watch it. And I actually think everyone should watch it. Because you don't love what you're doing, find something else. And actually, this is the reason I left Profero 3 years ago after being there 10 years, because I stopped loving it. Just to finish off, and again, I'm going to talk about advice. What I love about advice is, and I've talked about it, transcending different sectors, but I love the fact it can be handed down. So it's one of these things that can be handed down like hereditary. So there is a reason why I put Lord Putnam up there. When I first met Lord Putnam, he told me about a story when he was an account executive at CDP. For those that don't know CDP, in the 60s, it was the equivalent, it was the thing that kind of invented advertising here in the UK. And his boss, it was his 3-month probationary review, and he kind of said, what else can I do? I don't feel like I'm getting what I need to do. What is my job? And his boss said quite simply to him, your job is to amaze me. And I think what was really nice was that was the story that David told me when I first met him. Then when we came to do the book, and we got David as one of the speakers at Creative Social, Patrick Gardner then put it in his book, in the book himself, as the best piece of advice he'd ever been given. So it actually got taken down from Lord Putnam, that was his best piece of advice he'd ever been given in the industry, down to someone else. And I'm going to hand you over now to these fabulous speakers that we've got together. And I'm kind of hoping out tonight that even if it's one of you that takes one of these pieces of advice and actually uses it in their career, then I think we've been relatively successful. Thank you.